Releasing in cinemas on the 9th of March is a new documentary called Shackleton, The Greatest Story of Survival. A really fascinating look at Shackleton's expedition. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the co-directors of Shackleton, Caspar Mazzotti and Bobbi Hansel. Welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Now, I'm quite intrigued because you both have very strong editing backgrounds. How did it come about that you wrote and directed this documentary?
I actually went down to Antarctica on one trip back in 2018 for a ski film, and that's when I started learning about Shackleton, all the people who do these sort of trips down south. There seems to be quite a lot of them who go often, and they always regard Shackleton with the greatest honor. He's kind of the ground zero, the top of the hill in terms of survival stories and this sort of tale that gets passed on to everybody. And so we kind of amassed this wealth of footage from Antarctica and South Georgia. And then we ended up meeting Tim Jarvis, who was also down there on an expedition, and it became apparent that there was an amazing film there, and Bobbi came on board with her amazing skills of everything, interpreting the story into something meaningful and gave it purpose and vision.
Just a bit of a twist. It was Caspar who actually introduced me to the story of Shackleton, and once we started diving into the core messages of what makes the story amazing, I mean, it is a story of failure reframed to become such a great success in the end. But boy, is it a long journey to get through all of those trials and tribulations. And I think having access to material that was shot in 2018 and access to Tim Jarvis and his take on, I guess it's through the modern lens, looking at this century-old story, it certainly revived in me, I think both of us, it really resonated a sense of modern leadership and what we need now, what we could take into our lives today to achieve the seemingly impossible. It was very inspiring, actually.
Okay, that's a great explanation. That sounds great. Now, tell me about the approach that you took, because there is archival footage, which is fascinating to see that archival footage, the docudrama approach that you took with recreating some of that exhibition, and of course the contemporary footage and using Tim, etc. I mean, it's a very interesting combination. Tell me about your process in plotting all that out.
I think that was a big part of the edit, and this is where I mean, Caspar's experience in editing and his storytelling and craft really, I think, set the tone for how we could tell the story. We poured over as much content as we could get our hands on. There were hours and hours of just cataloguing journals. I mean, they're living on the ice for 2 years. I mean, my gosh, keeping a daily journal, that's a lot to go through. But it was vital for us to really encapsulate their experiences and make it as true to their, what they witnessed day to day. But having access to so much as an editor, I mean, it makes the job. I mean, there's a lot to do, but boy, is it such a joy to go through so much, to have so much access, to create the most complete retelling of this incredible story. It's not often, I think, you're afforded that opportunity, and so it was. While it was a big task, I think we both thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think there's a wealth of material available since, it was over 100 years ago. There's the original expedition footage from Frank Hurley, which is just amazing. It's incredible that it still looks fantastic, and although it might not be as, the resolution might not be as amazing, it still looks incredible on the big screen. It's got a beautiful quality to it, and the images he captured are just stunning. The still photographs still hold up as comparable to any sort of modern day film camera.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then we also used some recreations from an old IMAX film shot in 2001, Shackleton's Antarctic Adventure. So that's, if you are watching the film, you'll see some recreations. They actually took about 28 men down there in period clothing and went and recreated a bunch of these scenes, which helps to fill in the gaps of where Frank Hurley couldn't take his camera. And then we've gone down there and done our own trip to try and access some of the places that Shackleton went, visit some of the glaciers that he crossed. And so all of them come together to fill in the gaps of each one, and hopefully bring a new modern element to it as well, which we thought was pretty important. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, it's such a fascinating story. It is so interesting to see that, and as you were commenting there, it was interesting for me to think the editing process, which you are both so familiar with, that in itself must have been interesting, deciding which scenes would stay, which wouldn't stay in the final edit, because it is a 90-minute documentary, and in fact it could have been much longer.
Absolutely. It was a tough call deciding which stories went to the cutting room floor, and it's something that we've been so immersed in now for a while as we piece this incredible story together, that there's so many facets to it. But I think the real takeaway in the edit was to try and create an experience. So rather than presenting the facts in a timeline, it was more about drawing the audience in as if they were there. And I think what really aided us were the access to Shackleton's journals and Shackleton's book South, which we quoted from heavily, and we had the amazing talent of Rupert Degas providing the voices of Shackleton and the crew to really give the audience a sense that Shackleton was in the room telling them the story. He was guiding them on this journey. So a lot of resources to try and draw upon, but starting with that almost radio play style, and then finding the visual elements to then piece the story together, I think allowed us to really draw the audience in, and hopefully give it a cohesive blend between all these different mediums.
Yeah, I've got to say Rupert did a great job with the Shackleton voice. He had
fantastic.
I think there's all of one recording of Shackleton's actual voice on a really old scratchy scratchy recording. You can just make it out. And he studied it over and over and managed to recreate the voice perfectly. And he's brought to the table the spirit of Shackleton that really sort of carries you through the film. I love it.
Yeah.
How really interesting. And of course the other aspect of this is you had different mediums, if you like. You've got archival footage, black and white. You said you had access to some old IMAX footage, and of course what was shot more recently, and so on, and being able to technically put that all together also to make it look seamless on screen must have been also quite a process.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different sources of footage in there. There's a lot of different looks, but I think they do blend together nicely. They all sort of complement each other. I think with Netflix documentaries these days, we're all used to seeing these different sources and investigations and crime drama. All these things get blended together, and if it's done seamlessly, you kind of get lost in the magic of it, and you just carry it through, which I think hopefully we've managed to do. Yeah.
I think that the grade allowed us to, add subtlety to some of the different sources, so that you understood that they weren't necessarily, one scene had multiple different resources and media. Using the grade to try and cue those differences subtly, I think helps, while keep it cohesive, still inform the audience that we're looking at different elements of the story.
Okay, now it's interesting to note the film is releasing in cinemas on the 9th of March, and I also notice it's releasing at IMAX in Melbourne as an example. Tell me about the difference between the cinema release and the IMAX release.
Sure, the IMAX is a 45-minute cut down of the longer version, but in its own way, it takes on its own life, I guess. The pacing has to be a little bit different. Also the feel, the way it's adapted for that screen has to be a little bit different. Shots in some instances need to be a little bit longer so they can live on that giant IMAX screen. And I think although they're the same film, they give you a different experience, and different you come away with a different feeling, I guess. But both should give you a sense of the Shackleton story and that same epicness of the survival tale.
Okay, well, thanks for explaining that, because I thought it was the full 90-minute screening at IMAX, so it's the 45-minute version, as you say. Yeah. And I presume the film is releasing elsewhere, overseas, etc.
Yeah, it will be. The IMAX will be playing in a sort of institutions like museums and those sorts of places around the world. And the feature version will hopefully be having an international release soon. We're just waiting on where the Australian release comes first, and then everything else gets confirmed after that. So.
Australia, New Zealand, can't throw it to our friends across the pond. They'll also get get witness to the 90-minute as well.
Yeah.
Okay. I was also intrigued. Did you at all have a look at the miniseries that was made in, I think it was 2002, with Kenneth Branagh, who directed it or starred in it, about Shackleton?
I personally tried to avoid any dramatization of the story. I felt it was important to really draw upon the words of the crew. We did, I think, ingest a lot of archival analysis of the events that occurred through later publications during the late 70s and 80s and 90s. But we tried to avoid, I guess, that Hollywood take, because we didn't want it to, or personally didn't want to influence or perhaps over dramatize any aspect of the story, trying to keep it as true to the facts as possible. But now that we're launching Shackleton, I definitely would love to have a look at Kenneth's take on Shackleton. I'm sure it'll be fantastic. I see it's done quite well, so.
Yeah, it is good. It is good, that mini series, but it of course has that dramatized feel to it, which is quite different from seeing a more naturalistic documentary like your film, which is in many respects more instructive, because you go over so much ground in telling the story.
Yeah, and it's amazing. There's so much that which we touched on earlier. It's amazing there's so much that we had to leave out, because there's just so many elements to that survival story. Every step of the way there was some hiccup, some unthinkable challenge that they had to overcome, and we could only pick so many to fit in the film, and there's a wealth of other moments in there. So I really recommend for anybody who has the time to brush up and read the book South or Endurance. They're fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, look, congratulations on that. Certainly the film works really well. I'm intrigued by your backgrounds in terms of editing, etc. How do you decide what films you are involved with? I always find that very interesting.
You're very lucky if you get to pick and choose the project you want to work on. That's the ideal situation, and I think with this one, it was kind of a happy medium of, would you like to do this? And yes, I would very much like to do this. Yeah, so there's been times in my career where I've had to do jobs that weren't exactly what I wanted to do, but it's nice to be picking and choosing some nice ones now.
Yeah, because you've done quite a few naturalistic sort of films, Mountain Adventure and Turtle Odyssey and etc. So you certainly focus on environmental and natural sort of films, I suppose.
Yeah, and there is, and I think this is also, there's an adventure element to this. There's an environmental element to this that pops up in the film as well. It's not absent of those themes, and yeah, I try and keep those things in everything I work on. I think they're just sort of essential for life.
Fair enough too. Are you both working on other projects at the moment?
We feel like we've just let go of Shackleton, and we're both kind of ready to start
just
the
walked
next
into
one.
the whaling station a little bit. It's,
We were actually chatting today about what we should do next. So,
watch this space.
Okay, and I'm also always intrigued when I speak to filmmakers. Have you seen anything of late that has impressed you? TV, streaming, film, anything?
Oh gosh. Now that's a hard question. That's one I really need to prepare for.
Okay.
Let me have a quick think. Caspar, have you seen anything that you
Well, not lately. I actually don't have a television at home at the moment. But if you're asking for documentary recommendations,
Yep.
if seen the Imposter is a fantastic documentary. I think it's on Netflix.
It is on Netflix.
That's a fantastic
Yeah.
one. Have you got any other favorites?
Not documentary, no. I recently watched The Menu and I absolutely loved the originality of that script, and Ralph Fiennes was just incredible. I was so thrilled to see someone back an original story, but nothing in documentary. I better brush up. Better work on that. Better work on that answer.
That's perfect.
And Wild Wild Country, fantastic series that uses a lot of archival footage in a similar vein of Shackleton. I love that series. Yeah.
Okay, there's some great recommendations, and I certainly recommend that people go and see in cinemas and at IMAX Shackleton, The Greatest Story of Survival. And we've been speaking to the co-directors, Caspar Mazzotti and Bobbi Hansel. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure. All the best.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.